Мною принято решение о проведении специальной военной
the
операции.
reason why Putin is pushing up on Ukraine.
Putin called this a special military operation, but it's clear this is a full-scale invasion.
It's a full-scale invasion.
Как у нас пламя было выше дома.
We're like in the cellar. I'm not sure if
Innocent
it's
ass
like deep
niggas.
enough to help us to survive.
Russian troops and tanks have entered Ukraine on all fronts. All these cities are under attack, including the capital of Kyiv, which has become Putin's main target. Many are sheltering in basements and metro stations across Ukraine. There have been hundreds of casualties, and over 500,000 Ukrainians have been forced to flee their homes. This is one of Europe's largest wars since World War II. Since then, Europe's map has been shaped by political alliances. But now, Putin wants to redraw Europe's map by force.
Oh my God, he is sick, bro. Dude, they gotta take him down, bro. They have to, bro.
Современная Украина
Fucking
целиком и
nuke the whole Russia,
полностью
bro. Fuck
была
all the
создана
Russians. Nah,
Россией.
let me chill.
Putin has long claimed Ukraine belongs to Russia and they are one people.
We're not just close neighbors, we're one nation.
But Ukraine is a sovereign nation with its own language, culture, and political system. And while the two countries do have a shared history, Ukraine has fought hard for its own identity. Ukraine was part of the Russian Empire in the 18th and 19th centuries. In 1917, the Russian Revolution brought down the empire and the region spiraled into a civil war. Ukraine briefly gained independence from Russian rule, but was quickly taken over by the newly created Soviet Union as one of its first republics. Over the next decade, the Soviet Union brutally expanded its control, and by the end of World War II, it forged a sphere of influence over here, while the West held its influence over here, essentially dividing Europe and marking the beginning of the Cold War. The Soviet Union installed communist governments on their side, which were easy for them to control. But the West developed into democracies with capitalist economies. The deep ideological divide fueled distrust and tensions between the two sides, and soon these spheres hardened into military alliances. In 1949, these countries, along with the US and Canada, formed the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, and promised to defend each other from invasion. A few years later, these countries joined the Soviet-led Warsaw Pact alliance, and each side built up its military to protect itself from the other. Europe remained this way for decades, until one side finally collapsed.
Which is what?
By late 1991, republics like Ukraine began declaring independence from Soviet domination. The Soviet Union dissolved into 15 independent countries, including a much weaker Russia. And the Soviet sphere of influence disappeared as many countries overthrew their communist governments. Even though the Cold War ended, the alliance on the other side of Europe was still going strong. In fact, it was expanding. In 1999, Poland, Hungary, and the Czech Republic joined NATO. In 2004, 7 more countries joined.
Okay.
That moved NATO into the old
Russia-
Soviet sphere of
Russia's
influence,
finished.
making NATO's border with
At this
Russia
point, Russia
the
is
longest
just-
it's ever been. Belarus, Ukraine,
this
and
point,
Georgia were now
Russia
the
is
last
showing the
post-Soviet
fact that
countries
they
left
don't
between
give a
Russia
fuck about the
and
people.
NATO.
They're
But Ukraine
fucked.
and Georgia
That's tough.
both wanted to join
Don't
NATO
ever say that
for a
Russia
long
is stronger
time,
than America.
and that made them prime
Dude, they're
targets
finished.
for Russia.
They're actually finished.
Ukraine became a NATO partner in 1994, which brought them a step closer to becoming a member.
Україна буде в НАТО. Це історична подія для нашого народу.
Dude.
And in 2013, they reached an association agreement with the European Union. But when it came time to sign the deal, Ukraine's pro-Russian government refused. Instead, they chose to strengthen ties with Russia. After the decision was announced, hundreds of thousands of protesters took to the streets to demand the agreement be signed.
Russia
After
is the
months of
most
peaceful
horrible-
protests, the Ukrainian president
Bruh,
cracked down
I don't
and
respect
killed
Russians.
more than
Russians
100
have
people,
bro. I'm sorry, bro.
sparking more
I don't know if that's
protests,
racist
which
or not,
eventually
but, bro,
drove the president out
dude,
of
what
office
the fuck is
and the
this,
country.
bro?
This meant Putin was
Russian
losing political
president is
influence
this
over
childish?
Ukraine. So
Dude, what
he
the
decided
fuck?
to use force instead.
using
First,
fucking
he invaded
force
and annexed
by
Ukraine's
fucking sending
Crimean
bombs to a
Peninsula.
random
Then,
apartment with
Russia-backed
innocent niggas.
separatists
Sad as
captured
fuck.
the regions
Sad.
of Donetsk and
Sad as
Luhansk
fuck.
and declared them independent of Ukraine. Since then, Ukraine has been locked in a conflict with Russia that has killed 14,000 people and displaced nearly 2 million. For nearly 8 years,
sad.
Putin has held on to
Fuck
these
Russia.
regions,
Russia.
destabilizing
Ooh, Russia
Ukraine
K.
and
Russia
keeping it from
K.
moving closer to the West.
Russia K.
But in November 2021, Putin decided to go all in.
And do
Satellite
what?
images showed at least 100,000 Russian troops and military equipment piling up along the border of Ukraine. Putin repeatedly denied any plans to invade, but weeks later, he presented his demands to the West. His main demand was that NATO stop expanding and move its military borders back to where they were in 1997, away from Russia's.
Oh,
Western
get the
leaders
fuck outta
rejected
here.
his demands. Instead, they put forces on standby and reinforced their military presence
Yo,
in
it's
Eastern Europe.
actually finna be a
Back
fucking
at Ukraine's
war.
border, Russian troops continued to
Dude,
gather.
it is genuinely
And over
finna
here,
be a
along its
World
border
War
with
III,
Belarus,
bruh.
Russia began
It is
conducting
finna be
huge
a
military
World War
drills.
III. You know what's
On
funny?
February 21st,
Nothing's
the
gonna
threat of
happen
war
to America.
became real.
All that
Считаю
nigga Russia
необходимым
wanna do is
принять
take
уже
over that
давно
shit. That's
назревшее
all he
решение.
wants to do.
Незамедлительно
Oh my
признать
God.
независимость и
That shit
суверенитет
is
Донецкой Народной
crazy.
Республики и
Oh, that's
Луганской
actually
Народной Республики.
crazy.
His troops immediately crossed the Ukrainian border into Russian-backed separatist regions under the pretense of
Dude,
peacekeeping.
so this is all
Ukraine
he
announced a
wants
state of emergency,
to push
and
these
President
niggas
Zelensky
away?
made a direct appeal to the Russian people.
Война лишит
That
гарантий
war will take away
всех.
guarantees. man.
Гарантий безопасности не будет больше ни у кого. Кто от этого пострадает больше всего? Люди.
Exactly, the people gonna suffer
Кто
most.
этого не хочет больше всего? Люди.
Russia is a terrible place.
Кто
Imagine
может
living there. You're
этого
hell.
не допустить? Люди.
Hours later, on February 24th, Putin launched a full-scale invasion in Ukraine.
Специальной военной операции.
World leaders have spoken out against Russia's invasion.
We condemn this
If they ever
barbaric
catch this nigga
attack
Putin
and the
family,
cynical
bruh,
arguments to
put a
justify
bullet
it.
in, bro.
This hideous and
40
barbaric
bullets in each
venture
one.
of Vladimir
40
Putin
bullets in
must
each one of
end in failure.
All the kids, all the
chose
moms,
this
all the
war.
grannies.
And now he and his country will bear the consequences.
Anti-war protests have
Yes,
broken
sir,
out
my nigga.
around the
It's the-
world,
Ooh, I can't
including in Russia, despite
Bro,
the risk of
imagine
arrest.
how good
Neighboring
the world
nations
will
have
turn
opened
when
their
Russia
borders
is
as
done.
hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians attempt
Imagine
to flee.
when NATO,
NATO's response
the
force
plan
has
of
been
NATO
activated
was
for
to
the
take
first
over
time in
Russia.
history,
'Cause
and the
they're
US has sent
such a
additional troops
horrible
to Eastern
place,
Europe.
bro.
But in many ways, the world is
I'm
treading
pretty
carefully.
sure Russia has like
Putin controls the
Putin
world's
is like a
largest
king. They
arsenal
don't
of
even have,
nuclear
like, a
weapons
choice.
and has already threatened anyone who might interfere.
Кто бы ни пытался помешать нам, должны знать, что ответ России будет незамедлительным и приведет вас к таким последствиям,
I'm
с которыми
scared. I'm
вы в
scared. I
своей
ain't gonna
истории
lie.
еще
The way he's
никогда
saying
не
that
сталкивались.
shit.
So countries around the world are imposing some of the harshest economic sanctions to slow Putin down and sending
Dude,
tons
they
of
nuke
military
him.
aid to support
Nuke him.
Ukraine.
Nuke him.
For now,
Nuke 'em.
Russian forces
Nuke 'em, bro.
keep pushing
He is
deeper,
trying to sneak
but Ukraine
niggas so badly.
is
Nuke
fighting
him.
back.
Nuke him.
Захищаємо
Nuke him.
нашу
Nuke
незалежність,
him.
нашу державу. І так буде й далі.
I ain't gonna lie, he's savage for that. He talking about he don't need to leave, he need more bullets. He don't need a ride, he need more bullets. Man, that's it for y'all, man. Putin's war on Ukraine explain, man. Sheesh.